Good morning. Here we are at Monday morning. Steamy one, huh? Hope you're sleeping well. There's some cool nights. And we're going to get into the Word again here at our 611. Hope it'll be an encouragement to you. We're going to continue in our study with Jonah. And we talked about confessions last week, and we looked at Jonah a little bit. We specifically spent a great deal of time in David's confession to point out some things that are there in that confession. I hope, like all of us, I hope we took time to really examine ourselves in light of where we should be in our relationship with God. It's so easy to try to see the splinter in someone else's eye and miss the beam that's in our own. It's so easy to, judge someone else, but forget that the very thing I'm most concentrated on in someone else that I don't like is probably my condemnation, the very thing God's trying to work out in me. And so we want to look at what these dynamics are. And we want to break down a little bit further this week the idea of repentance. Okay. So let me preface by saying that what we see a lot today is one thing called easy believism. Okay, so pray this prayer and you're saved. Well, that puts the emphasis on this magical formula. If I pray the prayer, I'm saved. But that isn't how it works. And many of us have seen many who made professions of faith, but there was very little outcome from that. People kind of go right back into their sin problems. And I get, as I said last week, there are people who are involved in addictions, dependencies, and it's a little harder for people to come out of that because the body is so craving those things. But there's plenty of evidence to show that it can happen. And so we're not here to say or give excuse. We just know that's how it's probably going to happen. So we're getting into the idea of repentance today. And let's look at Jonah's prayer first, see if we can acknowledge where this reversal takes place, and then we're going to jump up to 2 Corinthians chapter number 7. You've heard me say, we've talked about the idea that Alcoholics Anonymous has a 10-step program. Well, there is a 10-step program in the Bible for repentance. And this is what we're going to explore, because we think sometimes repentance is a one-shot deal and it happens. And I'm here to suggest to you it could happen quickly that way, but it may be a process through what we call sanctification that repentance fully comes. And that's what we want to look at. And so when we're working with people who might be in dependency or having struggles in sin, what we want to do is follow the way God deals with us in this process of repentance, right? Let's not just grant repentance. God's the only one that can bring that grace about. But we want to be able to help that individual to come to that repentance, just as Paul is doing to the church at Corinth. But let's first go to Jonah chapter number 2. We're picking it up here. This is all of his confession down through here, but I want us to focus down in this area today. In Jonah chapter number 2, he says, I went down to the bottoms of the mountains, and the earth with her bars was about me. Forever thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God. Then he says here, when my soul fainted, where within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came unto me into thine holy temple. They that observe lying vanities forsake their own mercy. Now, we see there a sorrow. He now acknowledges that he has, through his disobedience, has separated himself from the holy temple of God, the Mount Zion, the presence of God, because of that sin. Beautiful picture even there of 1 John chapter number 1. We are to walk in the light as he is in light. We are to have fellowship with him. Our sin breaks that fellowship, But if I confess my sins, he is faithful and just to forgive my sins and cleanse me of all unrighteousness. And we've talked about the idea that confession is saying it the way he sees it. Now, notice that Jonah's confession is not just, I'm sorry I disobeyed. He now starts to acknowledge, and this is very important, don't miss this, he begins to acknowledge what he did. See if you can pick it up again. Here we go. So, he says, they that observe lying vanities forsake their own mercy. What do you think Jonah did? He just acknowledged it. He disobeyed God. That was the outward action. But he believed a lying vanity. He believed a lying vanity. And that's where the crux of the problem was. Instead of believing the truth of God, accepting that God knows best, he believed a lying vanity and went another direction. Okay? Now, then he takes a proactive step. So he's acknowledged that he believed or followed a lying vanity that caused mercy to be forsaken in his life. And now he's going to do something else proactively. This is another good thing for us to do. Notice. So he says here then, but I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. Do you realize that sometimes giving thanks to God is a sacrifice? You know it. Just as I said that, you probably said, you're right. At times, I do not feel very thankful. Remember, he's in the belly of a whale, in the deep. He's got to be thankful. And he's going to start to acknowledge God and thank God for some things. Where are you? What low spot are you in? Or what low spot am I in? It's at those places we must offer the sacrifice of thanksgiving. Okay? And notice what happens when I start to thank him. Well, this is what happens to Jonah. And the Lord spake unto the fish, and it vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. Obviously, there's a lot into that story, but even our sin can make a fish sick. Even our sin can make a fish sick. And so, if this is indeed a whale, the whale is beached. He spits out Jonah out onto the beach, onto the shore, and there we are. Now what's he going to do? Well, we know from chapter 3, and we'll get into that another time, he hears the Lord come to him a second time and says, go to Nineveh. And this time he goes. All right? We're going to move ahead now to 2 Chronicles chapter number 7, or 2 Corinthians chapter number 7. Let's talk about this briefly. And this will take a couple of days for us to go through because, like I said, there's 10 steps that we want to look at here. 10 steps. Let's begin here in chapter 7, verse 9. So, Paul says, now I rejoice that ye were made sorry, that ye sorrowed to repentance. For ye were made sorry after a godly manner, that ye might receive damage by us in nothing. We see a number of things in there. Number one, the sorrow that leads us to repentance. Many times we work with people, even our own children. They're crying because why? A lot of times they're crying because they got caught, not because they're sorry unto repentance. Do you see the difference? Sometimes they're sorry they got caught. Sometimes they're sorry because they know there's going to be a discipline coming, and they don't want that either. They're afraid of what that might look like. That's not repentance either. By the way, there's a couple of things we need to understand when we're working with repentance. Repentance is not regret. Repentance is not reform. Repentance is not retribution. Repentance is a complete reversal. Repentance is a complete reversal. And the only way this repentance can truly come is after a godly sort. One of my favorite heroes of the faith going way back is a man by the name of Lester Roloff. Now, Lester Roloff used to run homes for people who were in addictions, youth that were kind of rebellious, and he did a lot of this by faith down in Texas. And one of the things that I heard him speak one time, or heard one of his men speak on one time, is he could show that if the people came to his homes by the grace of God, he felt that there was an 80% success rate. Now, I don't know how he verified this, but he said that in the state of Texas, they only had about a 20% success rate with those that were coming out of addictions and the like. What's the difference? Well, the difference is it's after a godly sort. God's involved. That's why there's a greater chance of a reversal, a complete reversal, not just a little bit. Because you see, what happens in our states today, and I see it so evidently, and I'm going to get a little political here, sorry. Our public schools do teach religion, even though they say they don't. They're deceiving themselves and they're deceiving you and me. Our public schools are teaching humanism, okay? And humanism is about really elevating man into a godlike form that says he can, all right? That's the problem today. But unlike us here in Christianity, in our Christian school, we try to emphasize that there is a God, and we answer to that God, and God is the source of all strength and ability. Hence, he gets all glory. Now, that's what we have to focus on. That's what we have to understand when we're going through this process of sorrowing after a godly sort. And so I like some of what I think was being alluded to here by Paul, and I jotted them down. He felt like this sorrow, which is a grieving or heaviness or even a grudging situation, is according to God. It's according to the will of God, and it's for our sin. Now, let me end real quick with a testimony, and we'll get into these other steps later. My process of salvation, I cannot say specifically when I got saved. You say, how can that be? I thought you had to know. Well, I can tell you in a general way where I did get saved, but it's like this. Let me ask you a question. When were you born? Well, if it's in my case, someone asks me, I say February 2nd, 1962. Then, but is that really true? No, that's when everybody saw me. But I was conceived at another time earlier to that, almost 40 weeks earlier than that. My own mother and dad may not know when I was conceived, but God knows when I was conceived. And so the idea of being born again is really resting in God. He knows where that takes place. But in my life, the process of coming to that truth started my junior year in a Catholic high school. And I was made aware of some things that were not true. Later, when I'm 19, I'm running down with a bunch of guys to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and we're just looking to be like a bunch of yahoos doing a bunch of stupid stuff. And I meet a Christian alongside the pool listening to contemporary Christian music. And that conversation starts into a process that eventually that person gives me the gospel for Jesus Christ. I'm in the Air Force by the year 20. I'm 22. And by the time I'm in the Air Force, I'm stationed right back at my hometown. And my neighbor asked me to go to Faith Baptist Church. I go to Faith Baptist Church somewhere in March of 1985. And in March of 1985, I hear my pastor, Charlie Lynn, present the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he says, if you want to know any more about this Jesus, you come on down, and there'll be someone here that'll show you. Well, someone showed me, and I prayed the prayer. Is that when I got saved? Could be. I know there seemed to be a weight lifted off of me. Several months later, God starts to work in my life about getting baptized. And I get baptized. Was that when it took place? I don't know. All I know is that godly sorrow, me acknowledging that I needed to do things according to God, I needed to be doing God's will, that I had sinned against God, and that he had given me Jesus Christ, his only begotten Son, that if I should believe upon him and call upon him, I would be saved. And at some point, I recognized that he saved me. Where that took place, was that in March of 1985? Was that in June of 1985? Was that back when I prayed a prayer with a track back in 1984? I don't know. All I know is God did it. God brought me to repentance after a godly manner. And that's what we're going to start looking at as we begin to look at godly sorrow worketh repentance. And the word worketh means it is a present future tense. It means it's working now, and it's going to continue to work it to its finish. That's what we don't see in Christianity today, and that's what we want to talk about later. Hey, go with God. He is worth it. Let him go with you. It will be a blessing. God willing, we'll see you tomorrow. God bless.